Welcome to a new video. In this video, I am going to introduce the life of Sri Aurobindo Ghosh with you. His life will give you a significant amount of knowledge and values which are very relevant even today. So, Sri Aurobindo Ghosh was born in Calcutta on 15th August 1872. In 1879, at the age of 7, he was taken with his two brothers, to England for education and lived there for 14 years. So Aurobindo Ghosh was born in Calcutta in 1872. In the year 1879, when he was 7 years old, his two elder brothers, took him to England for education, and Aurobindo lived 14 years there. Brought up at first in an English family at Manchester, he joined St. Paul's School in London in 1884 and in 1890 went from it with a senior classical scholarship to King's College, Cambridge, where he studied for 2 years. In 1890, he passed also the open competition for Indian civil service, but at the end of 2 years of a probation failed to present himself at the riding examination and was disqualified for the service. So Aurobindo in 1890 passed from the Cambridge and also passed the competition for Indian civil service. But at the end of the second year of a probation, failed to present himself for the riding examination and he was disqualified for Indian civil services. At this time, Gaikwad of Baroda was in London. Sri Aurobindo saw him, obtained an appointment in the Baroda service and left England for India, arriving there in February 1893. Sri Aurobindo passed 13 years from 1893 to 1906 in Baroda service, first in the revenue department and in secretariat work for Maharaja. Afterwards, as Professor of England and finally Vice Principal in the Baroda College. These were years of self-culture, of literary activity. For much of the poetry afterwards published from Pondicherry was written at this time. So Aurobindo passed 13 years from 1893 to 1906 in Baroda services. First, he was in revenue department and then in secretariat, where he worked for the Maharaja. Afterwards, he became professor of English and finally he became vice principal in Baroda College. During these years, he was at educational or literary line, so he did many activities related to that. The most of his poetries, which were published from Pondicherry, was written during this time. In England, he was he had received according to his father's express instructions and entirely Occidental education without any contact with the culture of India and the East. So in England, he was away from Indian culture or even Eastern culture. He was brought up with Western culture and Western civilization. At Baroda, he made up the deficiency learned Sanskrit and several modern Indian languages, assimilated the spirit of Indian civilization and its forms past and present. So at Baroda, when he came, he did not know any of Indian language or anything because he was brought up in West in England. So he first learned Sanskrit and many other modern languages, Indian languages. And he assimilated himself in the spirit of Indian civilization. He read the history of India, the present scenario, and many more. A great part of the last years of this period was spent on leave in silent political activity. For he was debarred from public action by his position at Baroda. The outbreak of agitation against the partition of Bengal in 1905 gave him the opportunity to give up the Baroda services and join openly in political movement. He left Baroda in 1906 and went to Calcutta as principal of newly founded Bengal National College. The political action of Sri Aurobindo covered 8 years from 1902 to 1910. During the first half of this period, he worked behind the scenes, preparing with other co-workers the beginnings of the Swadeshi movement, till the agitation of Bengal furnished an opening for the public initiations of a more forward and direct political action than the moderate reformism which had till then been the creed of Indian National Congress. So Aurobindo had a political life of 8 years from 1902 to 1910. During the first half, he was behind the scenes. He was preparing his co-workers for the Swadeshi movement. And during the Bengal movement, the Bengal agitation furnished that opened a public initiation for more forward and direct political action, which was the need of that time. The moderate reformism of Congress was useless at that time. In 1906, Sri Aurobindo came to Bengal with this purpose and joined the new party, an advanced section, small in numbers and not yet strong in influence, which had been recently formed in the Congress. The political theory of this party was rather vague gospel of non-cooperation. In action, it had not yet gone farther than some ineffective clashes with the moderate leaders at the annual Congress Assembly behind the well of secretary of the subject committee. Sri Aurobindo persuaded its chiefs in Bengal to come forward publicly as an all India party with a definite and challenging program, putting forward Tilak, the popular Maratha leader, at its head, and to attack the then dominant moderate, reformist, or liberal oligarchy of veteran politicians and capture from them the Congress and the country. So Aurobindo was against the Naram Dal, and he was a supporter of Garam Dal, and he was a member of Garam Dal also. Tilak was the leader of Garam Dal. He was a Maratha. He was a strong personality. So Sri Aurobindo had clashes with the Narampanthes or the moderate Congresses. This was the origin of the historic struggle between the moderates and the nationalists, called by the name of extremist or Garampanthes. So, the Narampanthes were the slaves of Britishers, and they were very, very incapable to give our nation independence from the brutal British rule. So Aurobindo was called extremist, no doubt. Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, Rajguru, Chandrasekhar Azad ji, these people who held sword in their hands in front of the British rule, they were all called extremists. The newborn nationalist party put forward Swaraj, Purna Swaraj, as its goal, as against the far off moderate hope of colonial self government, to be realized at a distant date of a century or two by a slow progress of reform. It proposed as its means of execution a program which resembled in spirit, though not in its details, the policy of Sinn Féin developed some years later and carried to a successful issue in Ireland. The principle of this new policy was a self help. It aimed on side at effective organization of the forces of the nation, and on the other professed a complete non-cooperation with the government, boycott the British and foreign goods, and the fostering of Swadeshi industries to replace them, boycott boycott of British law courts, and the foundation of the system of arbitration courts in their stead, boycott of government, universities, and colleges, and the creation of a new network of national colleges and schools, the formation of societies of young men which would do work of police and defense and wherever necessary. A policy of a passive resistance were among the immediate items of the program. Sri Aurobindo hoped to capture the Congress and make it directing center of an organized national action, an informal state within the state, which would carry on the struggle for freedom till it was won. The he persuaded the party to take up the finance as its recognized organ, the newly founded daily paper Bande Mataram, of which he was the time acting editor. The Bande Mataram, whose policy from beginning of 1907 till its abrupt winding up in 1908 when Sri Aurobindo was in prison, was wholly directed by him, circulated almost immediately all over India. During its brief but momentous existence. It changed the political thought of India, which has ever since presented fundamentally, even amidst its later developments. The stamp then imparted to it. But the struggle initiated on these lines, though vehement and eventful and full of importance for the future, did not last long at the time, for the country was still unripe for so bold a program. Aurobindo program. Aurobindo was the supporter of non-cooperation, but a different way. He did not ally with the thinking of congresses of dominion status or mere statehood by the Britishers. He was a supporter. He fought for Purna Swaraj, like Tilak, who said that Swaraj is my born right and I will do everything to get it. So Sri Aurobindo was the pioneer of Bande Mataram newspaper, which was fiery in nature and truth saying in nature. Sri Aurobindo was prosecuted for sedition in 1907 and acquitted. Up till now, the organizer and writer, he was obliged by this event and by the imprisonment or disappearance of other leaders to come forward as the acknowledged head of the party in Bengal and to appear on the platform for the first time as a speaker. He presided over the nationalist conference at Surat in 1907, wherein the forceful clashes of two equal parties, the Congress was broken to pieces. In May 1908, he was arrested in Alipore conspiracy case as the uh, implicated in the doing of revolutionary group led by his brother Barindra. But no evidence of any value could be established against him. In this case, too, he was acquitted. After a detention of 1 year as under trial prisoner at the Alipur jail, he came out in May 1909 to find the party organization broken, its leaders scattered by imprisonment, deportation, or imposed exile, and the party itself still exists extended existent but dumb and dispirited and incapable of any strenuous action. So Britishers, by imprisonment, by brutal torture, by killing of leaders, scattered the party of Sri Aurobindo. For almost a year, he strove single handed as the sole remaining leader of the nationalists in India to revive the movement. He published at this time to aid his effort a weekly English paper, the Karma Yogin, and a Bengali weekly, the Dharma. But at last he was compelled to recognize that the nation was not yet sufficiently trained to carry out his policy and program. For a time he thought that the necessary training must first be given through a less advanced home rule movement or an agitation of a passive resistance of the kind created by Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa. But he saw that the hour of these movements had not come and that he himself was not there destined leader. Moreover, since this 12 months detention in Alipur jail, which had been spent entirely in practice of yoga, his inner spiritual life was pressing upon him for an exclusive concentration. He resolved, therefore, to withdraw from the political field at least for a time. In February 1910, he withdrew to a secret retirement at Chandranagore and in the beginning of April sailed for Pondicherry in French India. A third prosecution was launched against him at this moment for a signed article in Karma Yogin. In his absence, it was pressed against the printers of the paper who was convicted. But the conviction was quashed on appeal in High Court of Calcutta. For the third time of prosecution against him had failed. All three prosecution attempts against Sri Aurobindo Ghosh were failed. Sri Aurobindo had left Bengal with some intention of returning to political field under more favorable circumstances, but very soon the magnitude of the spiritual work he had taken up appeared to him, and he saw that it would need the exclusive concentration of all energies. Eventually, he cut off connection with politics, refused repeatedly to accept the presidency of National Congress, and went into complete retirement. During all his stay Pondicherry from 1910 onwards, he remained more and more exclusively devoted to his spiritual work and his sadhana. In 1914, after 4 years of silent yoga, he began the publication of a philosophical monthly, the Arya. M- Most of his more important works, The Life Divine, The Synthesis of Yoga, Essay on the Gita, the Isha Upanishad, appeared serially in the Arya weekly, no, no, monthly magazine. The works embodied much of the inner knowledge that had come to him with his practice of yoga. Others were concerned with the spirit and significance of Indian civilization and culture, the true meaning of Vedas, the program of human society, the progress of human society, the nature of evolution of poetry, the possibility of unification of the human race. At this time also he began to publish his poems, both these written in England and at Baroda, and those fewer in number added during his a period of political activity and in the first year of his residence at Pondicherry. So all his life he wrote poems. The Arya ceased publication in 1921 after 6 years and a half uh, uninterrupted appearance. Sri Aurobindo lived at first in retirement at Pondicherry with 4 or 5 disciples. Afterwards, yet, uh, more and yet more began to came to him to follow his spiritual path, and the number became so large that a community of sadhakas had to be formed for the maintenance and collective guidance of those who had left everything behind for the sake of higher life. This was the foundation of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, which has less been created than grown around him as its center. Sri Aurobindo began his practice of yoga in 1904, at first gathering into the essential elements of spiritual experiences that are gained by the paths of divine communication and spiritual realization followed till now in India. He passed on in he passed on in search of a more complete experience, uniting and harmonizing the two ends of existence, spirit and matter. Matter is physicality, spirit is non physical in nature. Most ways of yoga are paths to the beyond, leading to the spirit and in the end away from life. Sharabindo's rises to the spirit to descend with its gains, bringing the light and power and bliss of the spirit into life to transform it. Man's present existence in the material world is in this view of a vision of things a life in the ignorance, with the inconsistent inconsistent at its base. But even in its darkness and nescience, there are involved the presence and possibilities of the divine. The created world is not a mistake or a vanity and illustration to be cast aside by the soul returning to heaven or nirvana, but the scene of a spiritual evolution by which, out of this material inconsistence, is to be manifested progressively the divine consciousness in things. Mind is the highest term yet reached in the evolution, but it is not the highest of which it is capable. There is above it a supermind or eternal truth, consciousness, which is in its nature the self aware and self determining light and power of divine knowledge. Mind is an ignorance seeking after truth, but this is a self existent knowledge harmoniously manifesting the play of its forms and forces. It is only by the descent of this supermind that a perfection dreamed of by all that is highest in humanity can come. It is possible by opening to a greater divine consciousness to rise to this power of light and bliss, discover one's true self, remain in constant union with the divine, and bring down the supermental force for the transformation of mind and body and life. To realize this possibility has been dynamic aim of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Sri Aurobindo left his body on December 5, 1950. The mother carried on his work until November 17, 1973. Their work continues.